A decade of computing. How far have we come? More answered in this. I'm going to start again. I like where that was going. Alrighty, so as you can see here, I do have a PC on a test bench. So what this is it's actually an LJ771. LJ775 was the top sort of chipset that, well, die size that Intel had back in the Core 2 Quad days when those first launched. So it's based off of that platform. This board has been slightly modified to accommodate for the Xeon E540, E5450, here we go. A very confusing long name, or older names. 5,450s of Xeon are underneath that there chip. It's a 12 meg cache quad core processor, no hyper-threading or anything like that, just straightforward quad core. And it's teamed up with some XMS and Samsung memory. They're not quite matched, but it was all I could find because it's still DDR2. That's how old this is now. I mean, this board came out in 2008. Well, this processor launching in the early 2009. And then we have the GTX295, also an early 2009 release. This actually belonging to the man behind the camera, Mr. Brian. So thanks, Brian, for your assistance here with this wonderful piece of yesteryear. So the GTX295 was very interesting. It's actually a dual core GPU, so it has two cores on there, basically 280 cores with slightly less clock, just to account for kind of the size. And then it's got two sets of memory to work with as well, 896 megabytes thereof, so 1.6 gigs of VRAM in total. And this, like I say, was literally the best you could buy back then. The Xeon actually slightly higher spec even than the Q9450, which was a Core 2 Quad Extreme at 2.6 gigahertz. So this is at 3 gigahertz with as much cache. And basically what I wanted to test here was how far we have come in a 10-year space. Because Moore's law basically says that when you increase the transistor count, well, what he assumed would be every 2 years the processing power would double. So that is what we're going to be testing here. So we're going to be testing it against our Ryzen 7 1800X. Now, because this is so old though, the modern software just doesn't work. There are no Windows 10 drivers for this. Nobody's expecting this to be a working, running system at Microsoft, so there's no Windows 10 support at all. So I've got Windows 7 32-bit, Service Pack 1. I put 32-bit on simply because there's not enough memory really. It's only got 4 gigs of RAM, and because of driver issues, there's not that much 64-bit support, because 64-bit was that was the transition time, and it was only on the slightly newer set that we then got for 64-bit support. I would say that was LGA 1150 onwards, from the the origination of Core i7. That was when we fully moved into 64-bit. So I had to set it up with Windows 32-bit, and as a result get some very antiquated benchmarking going here. So for the processor, what we're going to be using is Cinebench 11.5. For the graphics, I did manage to get 3D Mark running installed. As you can see, there is the icon on top. But when I went to go and test Firestrike, it just simply told me, no, you don't have enough VRAM. You cannot run this test. So it just stopped me dead there. We did manage to get CloudGate to run, and Ice-Storm Extreme. Ice-Storm Extreme is not the best of benchmarks for 3D Mark, but I did get Heaven to run with some slightly gimped settings. I couldn't put tessellation on. As soon as I did, the whole system would crash. And we're not going to be testing hard drive because I'm using an SSD. So there's no real comparison. I mean, this board, for instance, even still has an old IDE connector on it. That's how antiquated it is. So some of our younger audience be asking me, what is an IDE? It's a big fat old ribbon cable connection that we had for hard drives, and you had to have them in a certain sequence, and it used to be a mission. But without further ado, let us actually run some benchmarks and then talk about the results. there are some interesting results here. Because we were looking at the Moore's law, basically doubling every 2 years. We would be looking at 10 times better efficiency or better results. And that wasn't quite the case. When we compare it to our results that we do have for Cinebench and CloudGate especially, we see that the processor is about 6 times better now with the AMD, and it has, well, 4.8 billion transistors compared to 800 million transistors. So we didn't quite get that transistor count right to double it up every single year. It's got, what, 6 times the base of the Ryzen 7 2700X has 6 times the transistor count and does produce 6 times the performance, but not in all cases. And when we look at the VGA test results, we see a 5 times multiplication. So graphics is actually behind processing, and this was actually a gut feeling that I had before I went into this. I was like, processing, we're kind of hitting limitations for desktop at the moment. There's no real need to go for general desktop purposes to have anything more than even a 6-core 12-thread. An 8-core 16-thread like we're obviously using it for production means and other kind of things. So for us, it's the more core count we can get, the better. But has that necessarily resulted in a 1-for-1 performance? Barely. And that's actually quite scary, because the instructions per clock are supposed to have been getting better along this kind of time. And I must say, it's a very, very good job that this made it through. This poor graphics card, 10 years on the trot with no thermal paste refresh. It's kind of impressive that it completed benchmarks at all, with it hitting 97 degrees. If you guys think that 70 degrees is hot by today's standard, most of this tech was good to go to about 80. The processor though has done the most impressive job of controlling its temperature. It only hit about 67, 68 degrees throughout our benchmarking. So that did a very good job. Now, obviously that's on a 45 nm process compared to a 12 nm process, so they can get those, counts into the die. So we've got to look forward to kind of 7 nm to see if that then leapfrogs us forward again. But Moore's law has definitely irrevocably dropped off, because based on these results, it's only half better per year for the last decade. So only 1 times better per year. So it's only doubled up really in 3-4 years worth of space of time. So we hope you've enjoyed this little kind of soiree into the past. I don't think I'm going to be using this for too much gaming outside of Tetris, perhaps, and maybe a PS1 emulator if we're feeling spicy. But until next time, I hope you have a good day. Bye bye.